was with regret yesterday we got a revelation from government through
my initial answer, a situation which cannot be allowed to continue. It is not right, it is not just, and it must be sorted out as promptly as it can. On that, I hope I'm sure that he and I both agree.
Mr. Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was with regret yesterday we got a revelation from government through written ministerial statement rather than an oral statement about their proposals for the way forward, and we should hang our head in shame that we intend to treat
my initial answer. My initial answer, a situation which cannot be allowed to continue. It is my initial answer, a situation which cannot be allowed to continue. It is not right, it is not just, and it must be sorted out as promptly as it can. On that, I hope I'm sure that he and I both agree.
Mr. Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It was with regret yesterday we got a revelation from government through written ministerial statement rather than an oral statement about their proposals for the way forward, and we should hang our head in shame.
And it could potentially pay for itself by generating £1.27 for every pound invested in it.
Prime Minister.
Well, I think my honourable friend has made an excellent point, and we, like her, absolutely recognise the importance of this issue. So the government is committed to improving energy efficiency in 2.5 million homes by 2030. And our aim is to bring 2.5 million fuel-poor homes up to an Energy Performance Certificate C rating by 2030. And as my honourable friend has said, this will indeed help to save energy and also bring down bills.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in commemorating all the victims of the Manchester bombing 2 years ago. Our thoughts are with the friends and the family of all those that were killed, the survivors, and of course the emergency service workers who gave such heroic service that night. They live with the horrors of this for the rest of their lives, and 10:31 tonight will be a very poignant moment for many people in Manchester. Mr. Speaker, I also want to pay tribute to the last survivor of the Hull headscarf revolutionaries, Yvonne Blenkinsop. She's visiting Parliament today. She led a campaign for basic safety on the UK's fishing fleets in the 1960s, and as a result, many lives were saved. I think people like her have made such an enormous contribution to our national life, they should be recognised for it. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to express on behalf of the Labour Party my outrage that the government has again failed our steel industry, putting 5,000 jobs at risk in British Steel, 20,000 more in the supply chain. This government has failed those people, and even at this late stage, and there is a statement later on today, must step in to save those jobs. Mr Speaker, could I ask the Prime Minister, why are schools having to close early on Friday afternoon due to spending cuts?
Prime Minister.
Can I first of all say to the right honourable gentleman, because he has raised the issue of British Steel, and obviously we recognise that this is a worrying time for the thousands of dedicated British Steel workers and their families, but also those in the supply chain and local communities. We have indeed, the government has been working tirelessly with the company, with its owner, Greybull Capital, and lenders to explore all potential options to secure a solution for the company. We showed through the ETS agreement that we were willing to act, but we can only act within the law. And it is clear that it would be unlawful to provide a guarantee or loan on the terms requested by the company. We will be working with the company and others and the official receiver in the days and weeks ahead to ensure that we can pursue every step to secure the future of the operations at Scunthorpe, Skinning Grove and on Teesside. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has also agreed an indemnity for the official receiver to enable British Steel to continue to operate in the immediate future. There are no job losses at this time, and the official receiver has already said staff will continue to be paid and employed. And my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, will be updating the House in a statement later this afternoon. And on the issue of schools, as the right honourable gentleman knows, we are putting record levels of funding into our schools.
Well, that would explain why 26 schools close early on a Friday every week, because they don't have enough money to keep themselves open. And, Mr Speaker, there are more than 1,000 schools across England that are turning to crowdfunding websites with a wish list of things they want to raise money to buy. Really exotic things like pencils, like glue, like textbooks. Why are they forced to do this if they allegedly have enough money in the first place?
Prime Minister.
Right honourable gentlemen, as I've said here before, and I've just quoted, we are putting record levels of funding into our schools. We have also put in place to ensure a fairer distribution of the funding between our schools. We are giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But what is important in our education system is not just about what government puts in, it's about what quality of education is received by the children. There are more children in good and outstanding schools, the disadvantage attainment gap has been narrowed, and record rates of disadvantaged young people are going to university. That's a record to be proud of.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr Speaker, I don't know if the Prime Minister had a chance to listen to or read the words of the General Secretary of the National Association of Head Teachers. He said, and I quote, "The fact that so many schools are doing this should be ringing serious alarm bells for the government." The Prime Minister doesn't seem to be aware of the crisis that's facing so many in education at the present time. So can she be very clear with the House? Has per pupil funding risen or fallen since 2010?
Prime Minister.
Right honourable gentlemen, we're giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But why are we able to do that? It's because the Conservatives have taken a balanced approach to our economy and managed our finances well. What would Labour give us? £1,000 billion extra in borrowing. That would mean higher taxes, fewer jobs and less money to go into our schools.
Jeremy Corbyn.
It's out in two ways, Mr Speaker. One is a Labour government would properly fund our schools. It wouldn't shortchange our children. And we wouldn't use Orwellian words like fair funding while we're cutting. Per pupil funding, Mr Speaker, just so the Prime Minister understands it, has fallen by 8%. For sixth forms, it's 24%. At the end of last year, the Prime Minister said, austerity is over. Maria, who describes herself as a teacher in an underfunded school, wrote to me this week, and she asked this. Maria is a teacher in an underfunded school. I think you need to listen to her. When will the government stop making false claims of increased funding for schools and start to tackle the serious problems faced by teachers? When will the cuts end for our children's schools?
Prime Minister.
I repeat what I said. We are giving every area more money for every pupil in every school. But let's just see the situation that this government inherited and that we would see under a Labour government in the future, having to spend more on debt interest than on our schools' budget. That's not because of what this government is doing, because we're bringing debt down. It's the legacy left by a Labour government. More money on debt than on our schools.
Jeremy Corbyn!
What this government has squandered is what it inherited. Children's centres, Sure Start, children taken out of poverty. It squandered the future for so many of our children. And
Order! Order! Mr. Burkhardt, you're an educated young man. When you came into the House, you struck me as a very well-behaved fellow. Calm yourself and listen. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Education's funding chief met with school leaders recently, and he told them the first thing to say is obviously they are not generous budgets. He's very, very cautious with his words. They are budgets which leave schools with real pressures to face. Everyone agrees, Mr. Speaker, that our creative industries in this country are an enormous strength to our economy. So why then have the arts borne the brunt of the government's brutal cuts to school funding? So many children losing out on music and creative art in our schools because of decisions made by central government.
Prime Minister!
I say to the right honourable gentleman, he started his question by claiming that this government had squandered what had been left by the last Labour government. Let's just look at what was left by the last Labour government. What? Oh, they don't want to be reminded what they left in the last time they were in government. What did the last Labour government leave? Unemployment higher than when it went into office. What did the last Labour government leave? The biggest deficit in our peacetime history. And what were we told by the departing Chief Secretary to the Treasury? Under Labour, there is no money left.
Jeremy Corbyn!
My question, Mr. Speaker, was actually about funding for arts and creative subjects in schools. A survey has shown that 9 out of 10 secondary schools have cut back on lesson time, staff or facilities in at least one of the creative arts subjects. Are the artists and actors of tomorrow only to come from the private schools while she continues to cut the funding for state schools? When the Prime Minister says that school funding has been protected, she's denying, Mr. Speaker, the daily experience of teachers, parents and pupils. She's denying the incontrovertible evidence of the IFS, education bodies and teaching unions. She is actually in outright denial. And when the wealth of the richest 1,000 people has increased by £50 billion in the last year alone, don't tell us the money isn't there for our children's schools. This government has cut vital public services to give tax cuts to the privileged few. Can the Prime Minister name a more damaging policy, a more short-sighted policy than cutting investment in our future, our children?
Prime Minister!
I say to the right honourable gentleman, the richest have paid more tax every year under the Conservatives. No, wait for it. They have paid more under every year under the Conservatives than in any year under a Labour government. And he talks about what happens in our schools. As I've said, we are putting record funding into our schools. But what matters is the quality of education that our children get. Labour oppose the phonics checks. They want to scrap academies and free schools. They'd abolish SATs. That doesn't help to raise the standards in our schools. But let's just look at the Labour record. Conservatives, than in any year under a Labour government. And he talks about what happens in our schools. As I've said, we are putting record funding into our schools. But what matters is the quality of education that our children get. Labour oppose the phonics checks. They want to scrap academies and free schools. They'd abolish SATs. That doesn't help to raise the standards in our schools. But let's just look at the Labour record. Free schools. They'd abolish SATs. That doesn't help to raise the standards in our schools. But let's just look at the Labour record. Conservatives than in any year under a Conservatives.
My question, Mr. Speaker, was actually about funding for our
Conservatives any year under a Labour government. And he talks about what happens in our schools. As I've said, we are putting record funding into our schools. But what matters is the quality of education that our children get. Labour oppose the phonics checks. They want to scrap academies and free